Well, first of all, before we get into introductions, first of all, thank you guys so much for joining. We'll kind of get into introducing our panel here, but for everybody who's in the stream and has joined the discussion, basically, I just want to provide some opening words to give you guys some context of why we're here this week. So, as longtime Destiny players, I think we all know there's been just unbelievable amounts of ups and downs that comes with any live service game over the years, and unforgettable expansions, painful content droughts, and magical moments that have led to long-lasting friendships and acquaintances through things like content creation as well. I know I've met some amazing friends along the way. Last week, we saw what it seemed like was an unprecedented turn for the franchise, where it came out from multiple sources that amidst some serious revenue target misses, with numbers being reported at 45%. Mass layoffs took place and really struck a nerve with the community, especially when it surfaced that layoffs included community managers such as Liana Rupert, and even the talented musical minds behind the Destiny soundtracks we all know and love in Michael Salvatore. First and foremost, I just wish nothing but the best to those who were let go, and I think I speak for everyone when I say we hope you find amazing new homes soon. It's a difficult time with mixed emotions for the community, spanning frustration, concern, and even still just that glimmer of hope that Bungie really can deliver the expansion we've all been hoping for since the likes of Forsaken. With the speculated delay of the final shape to June, there's a lot of pressure on Bungie to deliver, not only for the future of their franchise, but to earn back player trust, which brings us to this moment. Welcome to the Community Summit, a community-run and driven week-long event focused on covering hot topics from around the community. We'll strive to provide feedback through a centralized platform that takes trusted community voices and your opinions in chat to capture the community sentiment and provide thought starters to Bungie on how they want to navigate the next stages of the franchise. There are no expectations for Bungie to use this information. All we want to do is help by putting ideas out there and hope it sparks some conversations about key topics internally. Joining us today, we have some very familiar faces from the community to discuss these complicated topics and emotions that have been flying around the community. So first up, we have Destiny 1 OG, who's been a staple of the Destiny community for more than a decade now, known for his guides, keeping it real, and just being a down-to-earth dude despite all of his success. A man who needs no introduction. Mr. Datto, thank you for joining us this morning.
That was the nicest thing I think anyone's ever said about me.
Next up, we're joined by another genuinely one of the nicest people I've had the pleasure of meeting. A voice that continues to grow with each growing season, delivering weekly Destiny recaps on YouTube to help keep us up to date on the weekly challenges, exotic missions, and all of the different rotators that Destiny has to offer nowadays. Jarvenis, thank you for being here, my friend.
I only get the feeling I'm going to add more as we move forward. Like, my spreadsheet can't handle it.
Your recap videos are going to be about an hour long here in a couple months. And,
yeah.
last but not least, we have another OG Destiny creator known for Sick Trials gameplay, long-standing co-host of the Destiny Community Podcast, and anime connoisseur. Welcome to the show, Miss 5000 Watts. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for getting me in on here. I'm happy to be here with all the fellas and excited to see what we talk about.
Hell yeah. I can't thank you guys enough for making the time. I know it's always crazy to try and set aside time from your usual dedicated schedule. So thank you guys so much for being part of the discussion. I'm Above, and I'll be your host this week throughout the various community panels that we have planned for you guys. I've been creating content for about 4 years now, primarily focused on endgame guides, long-form videos aimed at educating the community, and I guess my game show GMG on Twitch, which leads to a lot of pain and deleted God-rolled weapons. So without further ado, I guess let's start with an elephant in the room. Now that you've had time to digest last week's news, and I guess, obviously come down off of the emotional high of all the news that broke last week, and I guess is continuing to break, and, as we get more details about, the inner workings of what's going on at Bungie, sales revenue, all that good stuff. How are you guys feeling about the future of Destiny 2 as it stands right now? Jarv, let's start with you.
I'm kind of looking forward a bit more than anything else. I'm like very much in the present, like in the immediate short term. This season will roll out. next season is kind of good to go. So like what we don't know is when next season ends, but we can't really control that until Bungie decide to tell us if there's anything to tell us, because they haven't confirmed or denied those kind of rumors and things like that. So I'm focusing really on what we actually have and we know we are getting, because from from a player standpoint, nothing will change in game in the immediate future, at least.
Sure.
So that's kind of what I've been looking at more recently, because I think all the other areas have been covered very extensively over the last week or so,
Right.
beyond the Destiny, as we know. So that's like my immediate kind of thoughts for the current week and the season ahead, really.
I think that that's a really good point, and something that I think often gets over exaggerated is like, you know, you hear the news and you just instantly assume that everything's, you know, just going to halt. But I think what people fail to realize is a lot of this is developed so far ahead of time. And I honestly think that's almost been a pain point of the community for a long time now, is you'll give feedback on various seasons or elements of the game, and Bungie listens to that feedback, but you may not see that in game for, you know, 2 seasons, like 6-month development timeline, because it obviously takes time to implement those types of things. Right. So it's for sure, Jarv, totally get that perspective. What about you, Watts?
Yeah, so for me, I think for a while now, the way that I've approached Destiny is just play the stuff that's fun, and if I'm not having fun with the stuff, then I don't play it, or I kind of step away. And it's kind of been like that for a few years for me now.
Sure.
So in terms of my playtime, it will probably be largely the same. I think the thing that concerns a lot of us, especially who have been around for a long time and have kind of seen Bungie as this developer that's appeared to have been different from the others, right? And I know it's, don't put any company on a pedestal, don't think of them any differently, but it has always felt that Bungie cared more than your kind of average company.
Right.
So seeing that there's been long time, like you said, there's people who have been responsible for the beginning of Bungie. You know, we had someone leave the company who worked on Oni and was all the way back on Halo and working on all of that. So that is very shocking to me. And it's like, I would love to have some clarity on where they're going, some openness from Bungie.
Yep.
And I think that's really what's going to make a difference for me. Because yeah, at the moment I'm like, you know, you can understand that sometimes these things happen. We're in a year where 6,000 developers have lost their jobs because of similar things.
Mm-hmm.
But seeing some of the people that have been let go, and especially hearing that some of it's going to be outsourced, that's the thing that's concerning for me. And like you said, we'll see the results of this in many years, probably.
I think that's like a really interesting point, honestly, is that like it obviously sucks for everybody whose job was impacted, but I think the one that like really took me by surprise was like the team that's behind the music on the game.
Yeah.
It's because it almost raises concerns about like, well, do they have plans to produce future content with like a similar
you don't
style?
Need music?
And like honestly, you don't want to speculate, but like that is obviously I think something that kind of popped into everybody's mind was like, well, he's been, you know, instrumental, no pun intended, I guess, like in just the sound and the feel and the life of Destiny, and all of a sudden just gone. And you don't really, like, obviously we have no idea why or kind of the behind the scenes behind it. And I think he was very gracious with the dismissal as well. I don't know if you guys saw, he posted just gone fishing and was, you know, had nothing but nice things to say as like a true industry professional. But yeah, definitely that one was very surprising. Datto, how about yourself?
What was the original question?
So the original
we've touched so many things already.
Yeah.
Now
that you've had time to digest last week's news, how are you feeling about the future of Destiny 2?
Got it. Okay. Yeah, like Jarv said at the beginning, the short term, I'm not really too worried. I'm actually really wondering what season 23 is going to look like, because I think that's one of the first seasons essentially that they got to really go full throttle on the whole feedback of like seasonal models getting kind of stale. So I am genuinely curious what they are able to come up with for season 23.
Mhm.
So that I'm not really too concerned about. But yeah, I'm also not even really the most concerned with episodes in that like I'm not worried about them not coming out. I think I'm worried about like their quality and what they're going to be like.
Sure.
But I do still think that probably enough of a game plan was put onto episodes that
Yeah.
they are still going to be made. But uh, after that, obviously we don't really know anything. And I think with Marathon potentially on the horizon very soon, I mean, they said 2025. It could be early 20. We don't know exactly when in 2025. It could be a year and a half from now. It could be 2 years from now.
Mhm.
I am still a bit curious as to what they have up their sleeves in order to sort of regain not only the community but also try to make a push for some level of growth again, because I don't think there's really been any growth in the community that much,
Yeah.
at least outside of Lightfall. Like Lightfall brought in a lot of people, but it also
Mm.
did not retain a lot of them like at all.
Yeah.
And this is not me, saying like, oh, Bungie always needs to be growing player base all the time, all the time, all the time. It's like, you know, some amount of growth and some amount of getting back into the public eye
Yeah.
in a not negative way would be good. And I'm wondering how they plan on executing a something to sort of try to bring a new generation of players into the game.
That's so there's so many good points made there, and I feel like there's honestly so much to unpack from, first of all, like 2023 being like the year of gaming that we've had in terms of
Yeah.
just quality of titles and the competition Bungie has. If you're not innovating to a level that like genuinely gets people interested, I mean, not only just single player games, like you've got, I mean, Baldur's Gate 3, like people are saying is one of the best titles in a decade, much less this year. You've got, Remnant, Alan Wake 2, Lies of P, just Zelda. I mean, you name
that's
it.
stuff that came out in the past 2 months.
And that's
You're
just
right.
that's
Crazy.
just recent,
Yeah.
the titles, right?
Yeah.
And so their competition, not only from like an MMO looter shooter perspective, but like there's so many amazing games to play right now that if you're not doing things to actively expand your player base and not just kind of like maintain the status quo of, the Season of Arrivals like 3x12 grid that we got so used to and kind of became a formula for them. And as you noted, that seasonal model to be iterated on, which I feel like this season they did actually a much better job than in previous seasons. I thought the deck was interesting. I thought the seasonal activity had nice like varied difficulty to it. They revamped some battlegrounds to be groundmasters. I don't know how popular that is, but like they clearly made efforts that were different from just the standard kind of formula they had been coming up with. And we have the exotic rotator now and just other quality of life changes that were added to the game. So I do think they made some pretty good strides in that regard. There's an interesting point that you made though, and I'd be curious to get your other guys' thoughts on this, is like, doesn't it kind of feel in a way like the Destiny community had this ballooned up community number, like that, like just this, super diehard audience that's kind of always been there, and it's just slowly getting chipped away like year over year. And to Datto's point, like it's kind of been a little bit since I feel like they've added an influx of players, like obviously Steam numbers and downloads and things like that with the free to try model and things like that kind of skew those things. But I think player retention is definitely something they need to start looking at.
Yeah, 100%. It's I think they've done things along the way which help boost that engagement, and you get that influx of players. You mentioned a couple right there, but it's what Datto touched upon with the seasonal model. When it's like for so long, it's been like copy pasta kind of similar models until more recently, like the interest wanes and that retention kind of falls away, right? That's kind of what we're kind of seeing. And everyone's played the game for so long, it's kind of like the seasons are less innovative than they used to be.
Sure.
And hopefully we, like Datto said, with season 23, we could start to see some of what maybe episodes could look like, or when they're given a bit more creative freedom and they can actually act on feedback, because up until now they've not had an opportunity really to do that.
Yep. And I think
yeah.
Watts, I'll get to you in just a second, but I think to Datto's point as well, those are likely well underway in terms of development. At least like the first couple, I would say, are probably like they've got concepting and maybe even for sure the first episode to go along with the final shape is being actively worked on. I mean, they were only, a few months from launch at this point from the final shape before. They're not even confirmed delays at this point yet. I think it's all but confirmed. And I'd love to actually hear from Bungie on that. So I don't want to be like, this is hard, pushed to June, but from various sources, it is rumored to be pushed to June of 2024. So, yeah, I think for people concerned that are they going to even work on the episodes? I definitely think a lot of them are underway, and I'd be shocked at this point if they weren't heavily in development. But yeah, Watts, regarding the player retention stuff, how are you feeling about that?
So I mostly play PvP, and I've kind of seen a lot of my community who are super into PvP fall away from the last year and a half. It just felt like there was been a lot of decisions where it was like every TWAB was coming out and we'd read it and go, don't like that. And it was like that for a solid year, where every decision that was being made in terms of PvP, I was just like, I do not get this. I feel like we are on two completely different pages of what we want.
Yeah.
So that's seen a lot of people leave. And I think that PvP is important to Destiny. I think it's a really unique game where you want to play the PvE and you take your cool weapons and your cool builds and exotics and you take it into PvP. And that's such a unique and fun part about Destiny that when you kind of just cut off one of those things, you're losing a lot of people. Because even with the very little support that we saw for Crucible, there was still a lot of people playing Crucible every day. So
and I to that point, it feels like that's such an underrated backbone of this game. Like whether you're a hardcore PvP player or just looking to pass the time, that's always kind of served as during the slower parts of the season, okay, I'll go chase weapons and trials, I'll go try and get better. No, but I totally agree. But with that said, they did bring in that PvP strike team. And I don't know how many of them were impacted by the layoffs last week, or if there were impacts on that team specifically. I know it was confirmed that the map pack that they promised for this upcoming year is still in progress and moving forward. So it does seem like they've taken that feedback and that year that you talked about where there were struggles and clear communication gaps on what the community wanted for PvP, and they're actively working on them. But I agree, it still seems like there's just a long way to go.
In the TWAB this week, they said we're going to have a Crucible team update, so it will be interesting to see what they say about that. Maybe they'll mention if it's been impacted. Maybe we'll hear, hey, there's no Crucible team anymore. They're all gone. Hopefully not. But yeah, I think that was a really unfortunate thing that Bungie just kind of let slip away. They kind of had something really special, and then they just kind of ignored it. But yeah, so it's definitely for my community, I've seen a lot of them kind of slip away to different games with those decisions.
Which, to an extent is very healthy, I think. Destiny, I feel like the Destiny audience is they're so hardcore, and that's what I love about the Destiny community is they're just the ride or dies. But I do think that sort of mindset is kind of faded more so in the last year and a half, 2 years, where a lot of those hardcore Destiny gamers are trying out things like Final Fantasy 14. They're going to Classic WoW. They're trying all these new games that are coming out, and just these incredible gaming experiences that they're spending time on and time away from Destiny, and that was
Yeah.
clearly reflected in you know, a lot of the player retention numbers that were revealed last week. So
Especially this year, right? Because we've had good games in previous years, but this year was like there is a 10 out of 10 game for every kind of player.
for real,
So
yeah,
instead of just like one player base getting hit, it was like every part of the Destiny community was hit. Because there was something that was a 10 out of 10 for you.
yeah, it wasn't just like the finals came out, so like the trials audience like dipped, right? But like it's like the PvE gamers love something, like, you know, Diablo was super hot for a while, and then, you know, all of a sudden Baldur's Gate and like all these story games, and it's, yeah, so for sure. All right, well, so moving on to the next question that I have for you guys. And this one's kind of loaded, so, and I want the frame of mind for this question to be, you know, obviously Final Shape is developed, I guess, hopes of what you would like to see before I ask this question. So given the internal and community pressure riding on the Final Shape, how can Bungie deliver a memorable gaming experience that culminates 10 years of storytelling in the light versus dark saga? This can be, you know, your hopes for the expansion, things that you know, would like to see that differ from previous expansions or build upon successes of previous expansions, or even just something that you've seen in other games, you know, in how we've been talking about all these amazing titles and things that you would potentially hope to see in a DLC. And Datto, let's go to you.
I mean, my original hopes for Final Shape were essentially just like, give me another Witch Queen legendary campaign. You know, give me the satisfying story conclusion that I'm looking for.
Mhm.
And that's really about it. That's all I was expecting. That's all I was really hoping for, is just like, hit me with some like nostalgia bits here and there, and like hit me with some fun story beats. But like the story of the Final Shape, I don't imagine to be a very complicated one, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
it's like, we're in the Traveler. There's the guy. Go over there.
Pretty much.
That's it, right?
Murder him.
So story wise, I'm not anticipating a whole lot. It's just like, he's over there. All right, we're gonna go. So it's just like, hit me with set pieces. You know, the stuff with Cade. I'm interested to see how that all turns out. But like gameplay wise, I think the last two expansions have been very good. Like the legendary campaign for Witch Queen and Lightfall, I think, again, gameplay wise specifically, have been pretty good. Give me some epic bosses, you know, give me some big set pieces. I've always said that Destiny is at its best when I get to feel really, really tiny in a gigantic world.
Yeah.
Give me more of those set pieces. Hit me with some nostalgia, Cade 6, whatever, you know, some good dialogue to go with it. And that's all I was really hoping for. That's all I was really expecting.
Which I think is
So
very
for
realistic. To
like,
be honest, like that's not asking for anything crazy.
That's not, yeah, exactly. I don't think that is completely out of bounds or anything.
Yeah.
So it's tough for me to say like, what else could they do when my expectations were just like this is not where we need to complicate things.
Right.
This is where you take all the things that you've done really well over the past 2 years, you smash them all into a campaign, and let people enjoy it, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, I don't really know. Like the longevity of Final Shape is like not something I'm super concerned about, because to me it was never meant to be a super long thing in the first place. Like episodes, that's where things kind of take over. With like the longevity aspect, sure, maybe Final Shape has like some kind of activity that you can go do or whatever. But Final Shape to me was never about the longevity of it. Is just like, I just hit me with a good campaign, man. Just good campaign experience, you know, hit me in the feels. You know, let's just end on a high note, and we'll take it from there.
Sure.
So
What about
that's
you,
been
Jarv?
my attitude.
Yeah, I mirror a lot of that. I mean, the story is probably what matters the most after a 10-year journey. It's got to feel worth it, right? So,
Especially with their focus on the story, like in the last 2 years, I feel like their narrative team has really kind of ramped it up from where it was, a few years ago, like coming out of Beyond Light when the year of Witch Queen, I feel like they really ramped it up. And so to your point, there's like this huge buildup of story that like really needs to pay off, especially for how long term this story arc is. It's a big deal.
exactly that. And I think they put a bit more pressure on themselves when they decided to split it into a second chapter because they said they couldn't fit it. They couldn't tell the story they wanted to tell just in Lightfall. So it needs to be a banger, basically. And then when I think about all the other expansions that have been, I guess, bangers, you've got like obviously Forsaken, Taken King, and the Witch Queen. Witch Queen's the campaign for the most part.
Yep.
But I think back to those other two, and it's like what made them actually good, and it's more about what they brought to the game on a foundational level. Like Forsaken brought a new ritual activity. I know it's Gambit. We might laugh about that now, but at the time, it was it was the nuts, the bee's knees. It was like a really good thing, and we've not had another ritual activity because they struggle to maintain the three that they've already got, kind of thing. And things like that. So, and those are good for DLCs because those are big, marks in the ground, and they also help build on foundations and kind of put a little bit less pressure on things like seasons and episodes because they've built the foundations. They've like Taken King, like Watts will know, like how much Taken King brought to PvP, but we've not had anything kind of like that. Right. Where the expansion kind of touches all aspects of the game. The campaign's what's important for final shape, but it also needs to kind of deliver a little bit of love and sprinkle a little bit of magic on the rest of the ritual stuff because that's what's that foundation needs work and it needs a little bit of love too.
I think that's such a good point. I almost feel like that's the the backbone of the game that's been ignored the most out of anything else. It's like the Strike playlist, Gambit, Crucible, which coming out of Destiny 1 were like obviously not Gambit didn't exist in D1, but like those, ritual activities are what held Destiny together. And not only haven't they innovated on those or like continued to provide updates to them, but it's like they've almost ignored them and to an extent, like, the sunsetting, I think, of and content vaulting, especially of like the strikes and PvP maps and things of that nature, I feel like really hurt the replayability of the playlists. Like I can only run, the like a specific Grandmaster so many times before I know it in and out. It's in the rotation every season. Like Fallen Saber, I think, for example, has been like a GM like 5 of the last 8 seasons, and it's just like, okay, here we go again. But I'm sick and I love Destiny, so I continue to play it. But I would love to, like, to that point, would love to see them build on the ritual activities and the like core of the game. And I remember there was actually a quote from Datto like years ago, where he said like it felt like the game was getting so broad and the depth was suffering, and I feel like that just reigns more true now than ever. Like we're trying to do exotic missions, we're trying to do the story, we're trying to do the seasonal activities. We've got, strikes, Crucible, Gambit, raids, dungeon, like a million areas, having the narrative woven in there, and it's tough for them to do it all right. So I don't know if you guys feel like they should kind of narrow the scope a little bit and focus on clearly like what's been the core of the game. But yeah, I think Jarv, that's a great point, is like you need to set a foundation for players to come back and like want to replay the activities instead of necessarily just, relying on the episodes or seasonal content to do that for you.
Yeah, like you could do a Gambit map inside the pyramids with Lucent Hive or Scorn, or just mix it up, but make it relevant so it feels like the expansion touches all aspects of the game. I think even Luke Smith said ages ago about like trying to make it so like the rituals formed part of like some of the updates and stuff, and we've just not really seen that. Ritual, they just get backfilled with battlegrounds. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, which I think we know how the community feels generally about that. So Watts, going back to you, what would you like to see them deliver in a major expansion to like that would delight you to play beyond just maybe the first couple of weeks?
I think you guys have touched on a lot of it. I think I'm very curious about the raid
Yeah.
because they've said that they want everyone to play this raid. And of course, we know that there's not a ton of people that play raids. It requires you finding people to play with. It's very intimidating for a lot of people. So I would love to see them find a way to get people involved with the raid. Like maybe not everyone can run the raid, but if it's possible for them to like help people out who are in the raid so they can feel like they're a part of it,
Mm-hmm.
that would be great. So if they could do something a little bit different with raids, have it be like a longer raid, maybe more encounters, but
Yes.
also enabling people to get involved who are not necessarily feeling super confident in getting a group and doing the raid, I think would be a really great thing because we know the raid's going to be a part of the story. And I think
Right.
that needs to be something that is available to more people to experience.
I literally have this on my list of things to talk about was the raid, the witness fight being, everything that it's been, built up to be. He's like the biggest bad that we've ever fought in the history of the Destiny franchise. So like there's that encounter payoff. To me, I feel like they've and this kind of goes back into the I guess like the more routine side of like the development of the game where it's been like you get 2 transition encounters or 2 like mechanic heavy encounters, 2 bosses, you're done. Or like it's like 1 encounter, maybe like some sort of traversal area, 2 bosses, and it's over. And I don't think we've had that like expansive King's Fall or Last Wish type raid in a really long time. And that's something that I'm personally hoping for. Like I completely agree. I think the raid needs to just knock it out of the park because it's such a huge like story payoff, and there's so much I guess like expectation on that side of it, and the raid and I think coming off of Root of Nightmares, which I think in terms of community sentiment was a bit of a letdown, I would say, because I mean at this point the raid's been solo flawless mechanically. I don't think it requires like a full fire team to participate and really keep them engaged. So and that's without exploits or anything. Those are legit mechanics being done solo flawless, which is pretty wild to think about. What about secrets or surprises, breaks from the norm? So like for me, when I look back on successful expansions, for me, like I played Destiny 1 but not nearly to the extent that I've played D2. So Forsaken was just like an eye-opening experience, and I think part of it was like the layered approach to the DLC that wasn't necessarily time gating, but it was like player progression and player driven I guess evolution of the world, right? So like you had an amazing base campaign, which I think Datto touched on, and he would love to see, right? But then you had the barons that you hunted down on the Tangled Shore. Once you reached the soft cap of 500, now you've unlocked the Dreaming City, which is a whole second destination and I remember walking in there and just being so overwhelmed, like, what is this place? It was their first, I think they quoted it as their first endgame destination.
Mm-hmm.
And then it unlocked like just a whole nother, you had the Ascendant challenges, you had the storyline with Mara, and then you had Blindwell. No one really knew what was going on there. You had the huge power climb leading up to the raid, which I think a lot of players are not for, but like it was that anticipation building up to the raid. Then you have raid day, right? And then when the raid's beaten, it unlocks the Corrupted Strike, and that naturally releases. It's not like, oh hey, here's a roadmap, we're releasing this strike 2 weeks into the season, get excited. It's like that was just a surprise that culminated of the completion of the raid. And then it also released the Curse on the Dreaming City 3-week cycle, and now you've got at the pinnacle of that cycle, people stumble on the Shattered Throne, the first ever dungeon, which I think also just flies under the radar as like that was innovative as hell because there had never been a 3-player activity before. So it was like this natural evolution, step-by-step player-driven experience that lasted. I mean, how long? The cycle is 3 weeks long. So like at this point, you're what, over a month after the expansion's release, and you're still experiencing new stuff. I think to me, that's what I'm looking for is like, I want to be involved in the DLC more than just, do I collect my patterns? Did I finish the story? Did I beat the raid? And I feel like to an extent, Destiny's kind of become like a checklist looter shooter where, you know, we have all this information ahead of time, which some of it comes down to data mining and things like that. But a lot of it has just become like, okay, got my red borders, got my seal. Now it's time to log off. And I'd love to see more of that like natural player guided progression of the world return.
I think that's the difference, right? Is that you have drip feeding, but then you have player driven unlocks, which are different things and they feel very different. Instead of being like, oh, I gotta wait till next week to continue the thing, it's like, oh, someone found something in the destination and that's unlocked a whole other thing for us to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would love more of that. That was great.
Yeah. I guess this is the other wish that I have, and I'd be curious to get your guys' thoughts on this specifically. Do you think the final shape needs to tease the next step of Destiny? And I'll let anybody jump in on that.
I'd say yes and no. I think I'd rather Final Shape make sure it ends on a really solid note as opposed to trying to build to the next, like, whatever cosmic baddie is going to be. If they want to tease something, you know, the very end, cool. But I think that's what like a lot of the episodes are going to be doing. And I also feel like, you know, whatever the next expansion might be, like they might even just save it till then, you know, as a way to like fully try to bring new people into the community. Like, hey, this is a brand new story. We haven't really told anything about it. This is a good launching off point, as opposed to like, oh, well, here's some other stuff. So you needed to go play the Final Shape in order to learn about this thing so that you can set up for the blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Like, give people the opportunity to have a completely fresh start with at least the story. They can come in at the very beginning.
Right.
Maybe if you want to tease some stuff, you know, at the end of episode 3, I know you don't need to necessarily play them in order and they're not necessarily sequential or anything like that.
Sure.
But what would help is if they tease story, like next story stuff, you know, in trailers, or like if they do a showcase next year or something like that. That's where I think I'd rather see it.
Okay.
Just because, again, I think the biggest thing with new players is like they can't play the game from the beginning.
Right.
You literally can't. You can play the earliest thing you can play is what, Shadowkeep, and then maybe a random Forsaken mission from the mission rotator.
Yep.
People want to be able to start something from the beginning, and so I think having whatever the next step of the story be, having it be its own thing, would maybe be for the best.
Yeah.
Question mark.
Do you think that means? I mean, I'll let the others answer first, and then I'm gonna go a different direction with the next question than I was planning on. But I'm very interested to get your takes. So I guess, Jarv, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I kind of mirrored the same kind of the angle, really. There needs to be closure on the chapter that we've got, and it's an opportunity to start telling a new story, you know, build character development over time. Because at the end of the day, when D1 and even when D2 started, the story that was being told then, we didn't know anything about the Witness. Like, he was a new thing to us literally in the last couple of years. So
yeah.
There's a long journey. Plus, we don't really know how long this next chapter is going to be. It's probably not going to be 10 years, though. I feel like Bungie will probably want to tell stories a little bit more concisely than they have, although they have only really been making a more conscious effort to bring this to a close, probably in the last sort of 3 or 4 years or so. So yeah, I mirror Datto's approach, really, and like the fresh starting at the beginning of a book makes more sense, especially if you want to attract new players and retain them for the longer term. It makes absolute sense.
Sure. What about you, Watts?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about bringing in new players. If you can have episodes kind of be the beginning of their journey, then it kind of does a similar thing to what D3 would do, right? Which has also been a discussion that a lot of people have been having recently. But it's like, hey, this saga is over. Here's the episode. You can start here. It's like a whole new kind of story. So yeah, I think I would echo what you guys have said, that I
Yeah.
just want them to really focus on closing this story out strong. And then the episode can kind of be the beginning of a new story where new players can jump in and not feel like they're 10 years behind
Yeah.
on story.
I feel
Yeah.
like it's a really delicate balance they need to strike, because I think right now there's so much uncertainty with the future. So like
Yeah.
whether that means leading up to the final shape, they kind of tease the next chapter of Destiny, or, you know, shortly after final shape happens that they do that. You know, obviously I think with the expansion rumored to being delayed to June, now you have like a lot of the gaming expos and things like that later in the year. Like maybe that would be an interesting time for them to do that and kind of build hype about the next phase of Destiny. Because like I agree to an extent, but also part of me like really wants to see, you know, after the final cutscene, like even if it's just 20 seconds, kind of like how Savathun at the end of the Witch Queen campaign, like you saw her ghost, like, you know, starting to circle her body. Just something to tease, like, okay, this might be where we're going. It doesn't have to be substantial, but it just feels like it's so open-ended and unknown at the moment for a franchise that's been around for so long. I feel like we've always kind of had that next step kind of in sight, and I don't know. It's like really hard to know, especially with like the saga we've all known and loved for so long. Like that chapter of Destiny is completely closing, and it's kind of like, how early do you need to communicate that? Because players just have no expectation of where Destiny goes from here. You know, whether marathon's their primary focus, whether, you know, I think there's just so many unanswered questions. So to me, I feel like it almost needs to be done sooner rather than later. But yeah, maybe that is something that needs to be done on a different medium rather than in game with the campaign itself. So Datto, you brought up a really interesting point. Is there, if they're going away from the Light and Dark saga and they're completely transitioning to like a totally different story, you know, a lot of the stories that are in the game now are kind of they're broken up, and it's really hard to follow as a new player. The purchase path for new players is very difficult to try and understand what you need to buy, when you need to buy it, what content you get with like the multitude of different offerings that they have, where to even begin with the story, what comes first. Is Destiny 3 like almost a necessity at this point? Do you think that would be a good move for Bungie long term, especially like since we have this year of episodes kind of buffering post final shape? Is that where you feel they should go?
Oh, Destiny 3. I think it just really depends on what Bungie would want to accomplish with Destiny 3 and how they plan on treating everyone's stuff from Destiny 2.
Yeah.
The main reason I don't think a Destiny 3 happens is because if you are just like, hey, we're done with Destiny 2, all that stuff staying behind, none of that's carrying forward, you are going to have riots on your hands
Yeah.
because people, again, look at the transition from Destiny 1 to Destiny 2. People lost a lot of their stuff. They were very, very mad about it.
Mm-hmm.
And we had barely touched like the microtransactions like tip of that world.
Sure.
So now imagine like the people who have spent hundreds or thousands of dollars on items, or just people who have played a ton and they have all these stats and emblems and this and that and blah blah blah. And then
I mean, it's what,
tell
7 years of building this stuff up at this point. I mean, D2's
Right.
been around longer than Destiny 1 was by a significant margin at this point.
Right.
Yeah.
So like we are farther from Forsaken than Forsaken was from the start of the franchise.
That is wild
So
to think about.
yeah. So to me it matters much more what Bungie wants to accomplish. I know there's a lot of people out there who would love a complete reset. I'd be okay with a complete reset. I don't care.
Yeah.
You know, bring some of my titles along, bring some of the stats along, you know, some of that stuff. But like if they're going to bring everything forward, then they're going to be porting over like half the freaking game already over to Destiny 3. So then I'd have to ask, like, what does Destiny 3 accomplish over just continuing to make it in Destiny 2? Now, I'm going to bring up the E word, engine. If Bungie wanted to do something where, look, it's like a CS2 situation where a CS2 came out, I was like, look, we don't want to develop on Source 1 anymore. Okay. We need to pull the Band-Aid off at some point. We need to go over to Source 2. We're making CS2. If Destiny is the same kind of thing where Bungie's like, look, we've been working on this new proprietary in-house engine this whole time. It's going to make developing the game way, way easier. We need to make a Destiny 3. I think a lot of people are going to be like, fine. Okay. It's a technological reason.
Yeah.
But other than that, I just, there's an audience out there that would love a Destiny 3. There's an audience out there that loves the idea of what a Destiny 3 could be. But also it's like Destiny is already, it's already Destiny,
Right.
Like I just don't, I think people are just hopeful for change in a franchise that just like already is very well established and kind of knows what it is.
100%.
And
the greener pasture
it's
ideology.
Yeah, I just don't think it's as easy as just being like, just make Destiny 3, because like they got to shut down all development of Destiny 2. Sorry, I know it's long-winded. They got to shut down development of Destiny 2, right? And then Destiny 3, you figure, is what, at minimum 3 years to make?
Yeah.
So they're shutting down all development of Destiny 2 in a time where their revenue is not as high as they want it to be. So then they have Marathon still in development, so they are basically making no money trying to essentially do a remake and a new game at the same time. It's like, doesn't make business sense to even try that. There's just so many things that point to like it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
Unless like a bunch of things all align.
I think you make a lot of really interesting points, and I'm going to make counterpoints before we hear from Jarv and Watts. So for me, I think right now we have a lot of loot bloat in Destiny, which isn't necessarily like a bad thing for everybody. People love the loot that they work for. It's just a reality of, a game that's been around for such a long time in a live service setting. Like we were talking about at the beginning of the question, like this game's been around for what, like 6-7 years at this point, which is, it's wild to think about. The Destiny franchise is approaching 10 years, and Destiny 3 was only 3 of those. So balancing for everything, keeping people interested in loot, keeping player power, at a reasonable level, keeping people interested in new raid loot and the seasonal expansions. You have the 3.0 subclasses that I think have done a lot of really cool things for the game, but there's also a significant portion of the community that feels we're far too strong right now. There's another portion of the community that feels, we finally have the power fantasy that we've been asking for. And so I think it's really difficult because, one, I think you run into technical restrictions, with the game as it stands right now. Like the error codes have been a common thing. I think, there's obviously things that they've said are hard to code around and fix with the current engine, as you noted before. So those are justifications for Destiny 3, potentially, in my mind, unless they can make those back-end patches, which they've stated that they're actively working on. And then, there's also the idea of, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be a Destiny 3. Could it be, is the final shape and the culmination of this 10-year story, is that a natural breaking point for, kind of a natural story-driven loot reset that kind of re-engages the player base again? Because I think we have so many weapons that do so much of the same thing. We have perks that are insanely powerful now that, like, for something to be worth chasing, the new loot has to be so strong to compete in any capacity right away. They have to make it either pretty much best in slot or have it carve a significant niche, or people just aren't interested in it. So I guess from that perspective and everything Datto has said, I guess it goes back to that same question. Watts, what do you think in terms of like that next phase for Destiny, either D3 or any sort of reset, or do you feel like we just continue on as we are now?
Honestly, I think that sunsetting was a really good idea. And I think that Bungie just didn't approach it in the best way. Because I think a lot of people were down for sunsetting.
Yeah.
But then they saw like, oh, you're just bringing back the weapons, the same weapons.
Yeah.
So that's not really the fun thing, right? You took away a bunch of weapons. There weren't enough weapons to replace the weapons that went away, and then you just started bringing back the old weapons. But I think sunsetting itself is a really good thing that a lot of games use to keep people interested in new loot, because currently they're kind of, the way that they're doing it is like they bring weapons back and they give them a new origin perk, and like the origin perk is maybe better than the last one.
Yeah.
But then you have the same problem as just bringing back another weapon that is better. Like, how many more amazing origin perks can you create that makes people go, I'm gonna go get that new one instead of using this old one?
Yeah.
So I think Destiny 3 would be pretty rough. I don't think it's really an option, for the
Fair.
reasons that Datto said. Like, you would have to spend years and years and years working on this thing, and you're in a state where I don't think you can really do that. And, you know, maybe after Marathon comes out and Marathon does really well, then maybe you can start looking at a Destiny 3. But yeah, just kind of sitting on developing 2 games is pretty rough.
Yeah.
But I'm all for a fresh restart personally. I think it is incredibly difficult to keep players engaged with new armor and new weapons forever without
Yeah.
having some
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of reset.
I mean, both on like people hate the word, but like both up from a power creep perspective, but also just like genuine player loot interest. I mean, we're at the point now where we have GLs that can shoot 20 GLs in a row with a 35% damage buff, and you know, we have a wave frame grenade launcher that you shoot at the ground, you don't really have to aim it, and it clears an entire room with one shot. Like, the level of like just power that we have in our weapons now, and combined with our abilities, like, you know, I think it leads to issues with, you know, challenging players. And what I think players kind of fail to realize is that a lot of times the more powerful you become, the developer has to come up with ways to continually challenge you. And I think a lot of that has turned into like that artificial difficulty that many people aren't in favor of, but they also don't realize like the reason that's happening is because we're so strong right now and continue to just get stronger and stronger with each passing season, because our loot needs to continuously get better to keep players interested. But yeah,
I mean,
what
that's been an issue since literally Reckoning, season 6.
Yeah,
We're in
Reckoning was
season-
like
we're about to hit
the
23.
Yeah.
Like, it's
We got
always been a
Reckoning.
problem.
that's actually
Yeah.
pretty wild when you phrase it like that. But yeah, I mean, it's just you know, there's no perfect solution, and like I'm by no means like trying to say, you know, we should, you know, all the loot should be sunset immediately. But like, I think Watts makes great points. I think sunsetting is done in other MMOs and looter shooters for a reason. It's to avoid these exact issues and to avoid those artificial difficulties that people really just aren't a fan of, but don't realize like it all ties back to what you have as power fantasy in the game currently. And I think if I were to give feedback on the whole sunsetting situation, it's like, one, they sunset way too much stuff like all at one time. I think it was like 8 or 9 seasons worth of weapons like in one go, and I think we were, you know, what, on like season 10 at that point, so like the majority of the game was sunset, and then there were literally holes in the sandbox that couldn't be fulfilled. Like, we didn't have a void SMG, I believe, at the launch. Like, things like that feel bad as a player. And then they kind of, you know, they start to bring, like, to your point, like, they brought some weapons back, and that feels really bad from a player perspective. It's like, why'd you even sunset that weapon in the first place? And some of them they brought back with kind of like a diluted perk pool, which reduced the power fantasy of the weapon you previously knew. So like, those things just feel so bad. And I feel like if you were to commit to sunsetting properly, give them, you know, like a huge influx of loot that people would actually care about, like, one, you'd be way more motivated to go and grind the seasonal activities, to go and grind, you know, the open world, the Pale Heart that's coming in the final shape, like for those weapons, and the raid like would mean so much more, right? But or I guess like the expansion post final shape, but that's kind of my opinion on it. What about you, Jarv?
I've had a lot to think about, like a D3, but I think with where we are with D2, like even if they took the time to make a D3, if the creative direction from the leadership continues in the same way that it has done, which has resulted in where we are now, then what's to say that a D3 doesn't end up in the same position
100%.
years down the line? So there needs to, and it's quite evident that the devs were quite vocal, and a lot of the feedback that you've just described, they were probably trying to, you know, address some of those and hit barriers and things like that. So until those barriers are broken down, then we're kind of in a bit of a status quo kind of situation, really. I think a reset is good. I agree with Watts 100%. Like, I feel like that's good for the game, but I don't want to get my 5th or 6th reskin Better Devils just with different perks.
Yes.
That's not fun, you know. That doesn't incentivize me to grind for loot. And we're not really grinding for loot, we're grinding for patterns now, right? So the loot grind doesn't really exist. So until they address those things, that's kind of my view on the D3. I don't think they actually have the headcount to do it. They definitely don't seem to have the finances to do it. And if they don't change their creative direction, then we're just going to end up in the same place anyway. So
you said something very interesting just there that I picked out was you don't really have to grind for loot anymore. And that actually leads into my next question. So story aside, loot incentive is at the heartbeat of what makes every great expansion tick, right? Like in any game you've played, whether it's an MMO, looter shooter, whatever, right? It's like that long form loot pursuit that keeps you interested, even when the content, you know, you've played through it and you've experienced it and that part of it's over. It's like, okay, now I want to go and grind for the weapons and the loot that I find interesting. So I pose a simple question to you guys. Is Destiny loot interesting in the current landscape of the game? And anybody can start on that one.
I've started every time someone else can go.
I can go. So sometimes yes, sometimes no. I think it runs into the same problem that we've been talking about, where we kind of have everything, and the only way that a new weapon that comes out that's going to grab your attention is if it's significantly better, which is power creep, or if the origin trait is significantly better for what you're trying to do. I think Bungie's done a pretty good job for where they're at with adding like more perks to weapons that can interact with subclasses, and then you can build around that, and that's been a fun thing. So I think they've done pretty good with what they have in front of them. But for me personally, the loot lost a lot of its interest when they started simmering down on PvP. So just on a personal level, like, I don't want to do the raid as much. I don't want to do the dungeon as much because I don't care to play PvP as much, and that's the only reason that I'm doing those things.
Right.
So I'm hoping with the focus going on to Crucible a bit more, that kind of comes back around for me. But yeah, it's kind of just hit and miss with me with the loot. Sometimes there's a weapon that I really want to go for. Like right now, there's a world sidearm drop that is just like a pretty cool sidearm, and I'd like to get it. But world drops are really hard to focus and try and grind for. So
they sure
that kind of kills my drive to go after that, because I don't even know how I can really target that and go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think it does coincide really well with what we were talking about before, with it's got to be really good or something really different. Or like when we had Strand introduced and we start getting Strand versions of weapons, it's like, okay, well, now I'm interested in the loot, but it requires Bungie to add something new in order for me to be super interested in it, which they can't do forever.
For sure. What about you, Jarv?
Yeah, I mirror that. Those synergies with weapons and abilities is really good. I'm excited for next season with stasis mods on the menu and what they could do, and potentially see some new perks that could synergize with the fragments and aspects a bit more. That creates, you know, a bit more freedom when it comes to builds and stuff. So that's interesting, but it's just man, just the patterns every season. It's so repetitive, but unfun at the same time. Like seasons used to have like quite unique looking weapons, but now they're just like that's Fatebringer with a few bolts sticking out of it. Like it's not, and it's like why is it? It's a strand weapon, but it doesn't have threadling. Like you got all these big questions and things like that. So that's the unfun. I think crafting has been good, but it's also been bad for Destiny.
Yeah.
You don't really grind for anything that much now, like so, which is kind of what you used to do in looter shooters, and so I think that's the biggest. That's probably the pain point with do I find loot interesting sometimes, like what said, but if it's crafting, then you just get the patterns and you're good, aren't you? So
That's kind of part of it. Is like I know there's a significant audience that is in favor of weapon crafting, and to an extent, I think like it can be good for the game. However, I feel like the most exciting loot in the game right now are weapons that aren't craftable. Like for me as a PvE player, like Cold Comfort from Ghost of the Deep has like a perk combination on a rocket that you can't get, nor can you craft it. So you're literally forced to grind for it. You know, there's the Unforgiven from Duality, which is an amazing Void SMG for PvE. And you have weapons like that. Like you have the Cataphract from Trials that I know PvE players are going in there and grinding out, you know, against their will, basically to try and get the God roll for the DPS metas upcoming and that sort of thing. And I feel like those non-craftable weapons are the ones that are like the most exciting for you to get. However, you know, I think there's also a huge portion of the community that doesn't want to go and suffer the RNG fest, which I also totally understand, right? So like I'm that kind of player that like I'll grind for the stuff that really matters, and you know the weapons that I don't feel like I'm going to use or will be relevant in endgame, like I just kind of ignore and don't really bother to craft, which has honestly come back to bite me in the ass a few times because I had to like go into the exotic rotator this season, and that is painful, by the way. Don't recommend to try and catch up on patterns that way, or go into dares and do it now because the loot pool's huge. But I feel like there's
touch
a
on
medium.
crafting real quick.
Yeah.
As that there's the way that Bungie initially wanted to do crafting is not the crafting that we have. You know, we kind of heard about it and they told us, and we're very open with like, hey, we can't actually do the thing that we wanted to do. Because initially crafting was going to be that you go into the world and you're looking for rampage, and you're like looking to get the rampage drop on a weapon, and then you can extract rampage and then use it on that weapon. And I think that makes the loot grind more interesting, because instead of just looking for a red border, you're always looking for a gun drops. What does it have on it? Oh, sweet. It has rampage. It has kill clip, or whatever you're looking for. And it makes it a bit more interesting. So we got kind of a dumbed down, diluted version of crafting than what Bungie wanted to do. And it's definitely made loot less interesting for me, just because, especially playing in D1, when you finally get the thing to drop that you wanted to get drop, it's such an exciting experience. Whereas now it's like, oh, 2 out of 5, cool, getting there. It's just it ends up being kind of like an inventory game where you're just looking at your inventory and looking at menus instead of interacting with the actual game itself.
And it's just those, I mean, it's like the idea as well that, you know, you get those 5 patterns, you have that guaranteed 5 out of 5, not even like close to a god roll. It is like a 5 out of 5 perfect weapon with every single barrel, with the mag, with the both perks that you want, like, and you can change them at any time. So if the meta changes, you instantly have that god roll again. So like, and I feel like all of the weapon patterns that you get up to that, even if you get the god roll like naturally before you even craft the red border, it's like, well, but it doesn't have the enhanced perks on it, so do I even really care about getting...
That's why I think enhanced perks were a mistake. I think that crafting could actually be significantly better as just an RNG protection thing. It's like, okay, you've been playing this game and trying to get this thing for so long. Well, finally you can craft the roll that you want. But exactly like you said, you get a god roll to drop and you're like, sweet, I'll use this until I get the thing to craft to make enhanced perks. So that even diminishes your excitement when you get the god roll to drop. Whereas if enhanced perks didn't exist, you'd be like, oh my god, I got the god roll, and you'd be happy with that.
Because it'd at least be a time save of like, oh, I need to go grind out the other 4 patterns or whatever. Datto, what's your take on loot right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's only really interesting when something absolutely completely eclipses something else, like, you know, your cataphracts, your cold comforts, your this, your that. And I do think, like, at this point, I think we've hit the ceiling for how high things can go. Like, I commend Bungie because over the past 2 or 3 years, I think they've done a good job of slowly power creeping the game, not too egregiously. It's just that now it's like, what else can you do? You know, what else can you realistically do?
Yeah.
That isn't just blatant power creep. We can make Volt Shot 2. You're gonna make you know, cosmic light that's better than explosive light. Like, there, you can only go so high before it's just like, all right, this is just, you know, now you're just
How
making
you
a thing
design
so it's better
content
than
around
another
it.
thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, and I get, like, you need to entice people to get new items. So I think, or you know, my hope is that when Final Shape comes out, when these episodes start to come out, that something may end up happening, or maybe with like the next you know, expansion cycle, something like that. That something is going to happen, either sunsetting or you know, just something to sort of reinvigorate more of the hardcore players for their loot chase. I don't think it's nearly as bad of an issue with the casual player base, because the casual player base is not getting every single crafted weapon. They're not getting every single god roll. So I imagine there's still quite a lot of wiggle room for the more casual audience or the not as dedicated audience. But yes, for your hardcores out there who are able to, you know, go grind out all the patterns, even in a season, or anything like that, that's where I think there's a lot of pain points, and some sort of commentary on that situation would be nice at some point. And I feel like we're probably going to get that around Final Shape or episodes. You know, season 23 weapons.
Yeah.
We'll see. I'm guessing there's maybe one weapon that comes out that's like, oh, it's the same archetype as a different archetype that we haven't seen in a while, like a void wave frame.
Yep.
Like, I'm expecting a void wave frame next season, because the last good one that we've gotten is from season 12. So like, that's an example of power creep where it's like literally people don't even have access to this. Or no, sorry, we have harsh language. Never mind. I'm stupid.
It's a rare
but
one.
Either way,
but I mean, yeah, because you can't craft that one.
I just use Deafening Whisper because I like the perks on it better.
Yeah.
But either way, there's probably going to be some weapon that's like, oh, we haven't seen this archetype and combination since season 14.
Yeah.
Here's a new one and it's got better perks on it. Cool.
Yeah.
That's what I'm anticipating from season 23. After that, I don't know if we could really sustain having every single weapon in the game have the best potential perk combinations, because then everything's just the same.
Yeah. I think to your point, like, they've done a really good job continuing to add perks that like do things that I never would have even thought of. Like, from a dev perspective, their creativity with the perks, whether it be like heal clip this season or bait and switch, which is like a huge change up in like the heavy weapon meta and actually requires, you know, a bit of setup and things of that nature. Envious Assassins like come onto heavy weapons and been like a really cool addition to how you can DPS a boss. Like, I feel like they've done a good job in that like in that regard. I think like the concern for me is you like for all of the crafted weapons, and Watts touched on this earlier, is like, I do kind of to an extent think that the enhanced perks were a mistake. And there was also a question that was posed from chat, like, do you know, was it a technical issue that they had to change their approach to crafting? Because I know you mentioned that, and I'm not sure if you would even know this, but that
I'm pretty sure it was. Yeah, I think when they came out and talked about it, they mentioned that it was a technical thing. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. I wonder, yeah, like, I feel like there's a lot of ways that they could take weapon crafting that would make loot interesting again, like whether we do a reset or not. But I think the timing of that would be really important. Like part of it is the enhanced perks. Part of it, like I also feel like they could potentially even add, you know, because right now I feel like adepts virtually serve no purpose in the game. Kind of like a forgotten endgame version of weapons that essentially have like no benefit if are not like even a downgrade from the enhanced weapons that we have that we can craft, unless you get like literally the perfect roll. And even then, like, I mean, it's the difference of being able to just have the parentheses adept in the name, I guess, to flex to friends. But to me, I feel like either they need to reduce down the number of available perks on a crafted pattern. So like you can still get a great weapon, but maybe like the adept version, it has like a wider perk pool with some more like higher tier perks that, you know, are something that's worth chasing, like giving you a reason to run the master raid or run a GM or go and, you know, participate in trials and try and go flawless. That's something that I've thought about that I feel like could be like a kind of an interesting like middle ground, is like you can still get a great guaranteed weapon, but maybe it's not going to be like the absolute god roll 5 out of 5 that every single person wants. And the people who care about that enough are going to go into the end game and try and push into those end game activities and really try and perfect that role even more. Something along those lines. Or, you know, I think what they did with vendors in the tower is also such a better approach to just like loot acquisition long term. Like the more you rank up a vendor, the more options you get of the perks to drop. Like how what is it, Riptide for example can drop with like 3 perks in the final 2 columns once you've ranked up the vendor enough times. And at that point it's kind of like you're not guaranteed a god roll, but it's a pretty damn good chance you're going to get a really good roll that you're looking for, potentially even a couple that you can use on the same gun. And to me, like that feels like a healthier balance where, you know, the more time you put in, the more you progress a vendor, the higher your odds of getting a god roll are. But it's not just like, oh, I wanted, well, got my 5 patterns, now I'm done forever type thing. So I don't really know how they balance it.
They sort of have that with like the more you play an activity, the more perks you can get on a gun. So like, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of the middle ground that would be healthier. I just don't know how, like, do you guys feel if they reverted any sort of crafting that there'd be like community outrage about it?
100% there would be.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Like I personally, I don't know if making like, I don't know if getting every weapon pattern should have been like the expectation or the norm. Like I wonder what weapon crafting would have been like if it was like supplementary to the experience as opposed to becoming the experience.
The RNG solution is what I say all the time. Yeah.
Like if, you know, if there wasn't an expectation that you were gonna get every pattern, or only like the craziest of crazy people were gonna be able to get every pattern, like then, you know, I just wonder where things would be, because maybe instead of weapon crafting, like, you know, everyone has 100 options just ready to craft. What if it's like, okay, well, I really want this thing in particular, so I'm gonna focus all my time getting this particular gun, so that way I can have it in a god roll version. But then most other things that you're getting are non-crafted versions of those things, or you don't feel as bad for keeping a non-crafted version of a gun that can be crafted.
Yeah.
That's kind of like what you guys were talking about earlier. I wonder what the game would be like if the expectations were different, or they set it up to be like, this is not going to become the new normal, guys. This is just a little bonus thing to help you along. But then I'm sure feedback would have just been like, why can't we get every pattern? And then Bungie would have made it easier anyway. So what the hell do I know?
Yeah. I mean, God, I almost wonder if they just limited the number of weapons that were available just to be craftable. Like raid loot, in my opinion, should not be a craftable thing, like similar to how trials weapons are not craftable, or GM weapons are not craftable. Like, I understand the frustration of like not getting your god roll, but like we also have that frustration with raid exotics. Like I know people that will go in there and raid 50 times before they got conditional finality. And like, I understand, so I get the frustrations behind, like, I've put in my time. I want a good roll of this weapon. I feel like it should shift more into, like, especially for the end game content, to get people to replay it and maintain their interest. Like, maybe weapon crafting should be pared back just a little bit from those end game activities. Make, adepts mean something again. Give them some sort of value that people actually want to go and chase. And, the people that really need that perfect 5 out of 5 god roll from a raid weapon are going to take the time to run it enough times to get it. And, the people that don't, maybe they get like their first copy of Fatebringer and they're like, dope, have the weapon, stoked about it. You know what I mean? Like, maybe I don't need the 5 out of 5 god roll. I don't know how anybody else feels on that subject, but I feel like endgame loot, like there's certain elements that just don't fit the weapon crafting scene right now. Any other feedback on that? I feel like we've kind of driven that into the ground, but yeah. So next question, and this one I feel like can go a lot of different ways. So to restore and maintain player trust, what key communications would you like to see from Bungie leading up to the final shape? And we kind of touched on this, but I think this goes broader than just the content that we're talking about. I think this also relates more so to like community sentiment, the potential 8-month wait leading up to the DLC, and what our expectations should be for not only the expansion but also beyond. Jarv, let's start with you.
I think with the elephant in the room, I think the two key ones is obviously, is there a delay, and if there is, how long is it, and when's the final shape going to launch?
We don't have official communication on that front.
We don't.
Still, correct?
No,
Yeah.
exactly. So that's absolutely key. And then naturally, what fills the void? It does nothing fill the void, because an episode is post final shape, so it wouldn't narratively potentially make sense to just throw an episode early. That doesn't seem to make sense. And then did they just do an April update, D1 style? Who knows? Like, it's all those are probably the biggest unanswered questions we have right now, because that kind of dictates what happens in 2024, especially in the first half anyway. Those are probably the standout ones for me, for sure.
Watts?
I think I just want Bungie to go back to talking to us like we're people and not a company speaking to their consumers. And I feel like we've all kind of felt that shift in communication style. And I understand there's been like a lot of harassment that happened, and I'm sure that was a part of it. But we saw it with the state of the game, right? We were reading it and we're like, this usually feels like it's the game director writing it and talking to us just as almost as like a player to a player. And then Joe came out and did that video, and that was exactly what I expected the state of the game to be.
Such a good point. Such a good point.
It was so much better. So I would just love for them to just be like, hey guys, I'm just gonna level with you here. Things kind of suck, and here's why, and here's what we're planning on doing, and just talk to me like I'm a person instead of giving me PR speech or giving me the old lawyer speech. I just want to be spoken to as a person, player to player, rather than company to consumer.
God, I forgot about that state of the game article, because like the one from Joe was so much more personal and just, I think, really captured the player's sentiment that people were feeling at the time. And it was like, the thing that was so bizarre to me, and it's such a good point that you make, is like, they were so different from one another. Like, one was so, just seemed like corporate speak and kind of like, maintaining the status quo of the game, and, like you said, giving the update to a consumer. And then, I just wonder why it had to get to the point where like Joe had to get on and do a face-to-face like scratch pad, heat of the moment type thing. Like, it just, I don't know. It was a very, that's a really good point. What about you, Datto?
I'm not really sure anymore what they can, because we've heard we're striving to be better, we're gonna do better talk, blah 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 blah. I've heard that a million times at this point. What I really haven't heard of is like or what I have heard too much of, it just, through the grapevine, through Glassdoor review this, and employee talks about that, is if all of these issues with the game are coming from upper management, when does upper management come out and talk to the people? When do those people
Yeah.
start to when do things shift with them? What, like, if they have been the problem this whole time, why doesn't anything happen with them? And I think until something happens with that upper management, that leadership, that ambiguous just entity, Illuminati over there, I
The
don't know.
darkness. We don't
Yeah,
know
I
who it
don't know
is.
Witness.
It's
I
just the
if I if I do regain any significant trust.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Fair.
have no gripes with individual employees of the game
Yeah.
at all, but everything has been framed to be like upper management is failing us. Then when does something happen?
Yeah.
When does an upper management shift happen that allows the employees to do the things that they think are for the best? If that is the story that is, being told right now, I can only go off of information that we have. For all we know, maybe they've actually been doing things correctly, and then some employees are the problem. I don't know, but that is the current information that is like to us right now. Is that upper management's the problem? Okay, do something about it. Otherwise,
Yeah.
I don't think I regain trust.
It's such
That's
a
we've heard that a lot actually from
I've heard it
people of
so
being
often.
like,
yeah.
even from people that are in quite high up positions in the company in terms of actual dev work, are just like, well, I said that wasn't going to go well, or I said that they probably shouldn't do that, or they should have done that instead. And it's like,
Right.
why are we not it seems like there's just a lack of trust from those upper executive people to trust the people that they've hired to do the job that they've hired them to do. Like,
100%.
you hired them, you, I assume, think that they would be great at this job, so why are we not listening to what they're saying? And I think, yeah, Datto nailed it. We need to hear about, like, what exactly is going to change to where these developers who are passionate about the game and play a lot of Destiny, like, these people love Destiny.
Yeah.
How are we going to get them being able to do what they think is right for the game?
Well, and
I'm just tired of just like the blame deflection. Like, it's
Yeah.
leadership, it's this, it's
Yes.
that. It's like, I don't care who it is, fix the problem already. It's been so many years of Bungie articles coming out being like, we know that this disappointed the blah 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 blah. It's like, dude, aren't you guys getting tired of this? Aren't you guys getting tired of having to put out the same messaging all the time? Fix whatever the damn problem is with the upper management, with the leadership, blah de blah. Do something about it already, or don't talk to me anymore. Because
Yeah.
I'm tired. I'm tired of hearing about upper management this, upper management that. I see it all the time with the Glassdoor articles. I hear it from former employees and do just through the grapevine, whatever. God.
I totally get the frustration on that front. I think it's such a complex issue, though, like much more so than you see on the surface, because like
I'm sure it is. I'm
clearly,
sure it's much more
clearly, well, and we obviously all know that, but like, I mean,
yeah.
there's like there's the layer of like, you know, community managers that came out on Twitter and were like, hey, like we were communicating, like begging for upper management to listen to feedback, and it, for the most part, when ignored, like obviously we have no way of knowing if that's the full story. But like testimonies from previous employees like saying that those things were happening is pretty concerning. I think that's reflected in the state of the game, like Watts talked about, like very corporate messaging, and then having to kind of like backpedal and do this like super personal talk. And then you have like the whole other layer to me is like, and there was a really like I watched the Skill Up interview as well, like with you and Cross and Bife, and the point that I thought was super interesting from that was they talked about how like it felt before like Bungie was like this one cohesive unit, and now it feels very like executives and employees, and now you have these conflicted feelings of like, I want to root for the game, but also I'm not happy with like how upper management is either treating their employees or directing the game, but I also want like our favorite game to succeed. I want those devs to like take pride in their work and feel like they're being appreciated for what they're putting out in the final shape and the episodes coming up. And then, you know, you have that whole other layer of like the whole Bungie thing, like when they would, you know, you'd get the tweets in all caps, and like I love that they're proud of their work, but like sometimes it felt like it just wasn't being put out there at the right moment, and like player frustrations were being ignored, but they're like stoked about what's to come, which is great. It's just like there's so much like mixed signaling that's going on, and I'd like, to your point, I'd love to see like what's going on with upper management. Like, are they actually listening to the community managers? Like, does Sony have to step in and potentially like would communication from Sony being like, hey, like we're shifting up some things like from the top down, like here's kind of what the plan is, like does that need to come from them? Because there was, you know, apparently articles last week that said if the Sony buyout didn't happen, that Destiny was in a really tough financial spot. Like, I don't know if you guys saw those articles, but like, that's eye-opening stuff. And like in a lot of situations that wouldn't fly in a corporate setting. Like there would have been action taken, and maybe there has been, but man, it's, I don't know, it's just so much to unpack and try and understand. And like to a lot of your points, like I don't know what communication they can make other than, because like I mean they said something last week and it was met with just player outrage of like, oh, of course you're saying that the final shape's going to be great. Of course, like we're going to try and produce. So I think to me, like to your point, Datto, like a communication from upper management, like whether it's Sony or someone like Pete Parsons directly themselves, which I don't know how well that would go, but and I'd like to see key features that have been highly requested kind of be either teased or showcased to some sort of an extent leading up to the actual expansion. And I know there's a lot of players that are looking for the 8-month gap or whatever to be filled with like some crazy thing where they sunset every expansion in the DCV that's ever been, bring back some crazy raid rotator. Like to that, I would say be realistic. Like maybe it's possible, likely not, given they just laid off a huge portion of their workforce and now have delayed a major DLC and are trying to deliver on that. It's like, it's a tough spot that they've put themselves in. And yeah, I mean, I honestly don't know where they really go from here. So the final question of today, and then I'm gonna let you guys go because we are about an hour and a half in at this point, and I want to give a little time to set up for the next panel. So final question: what is your number one priority, either for you or what you've seen amongst your community heading into the final shape? What is like one key change or communication you would like to see that means more to you than anything else? And Watts, we'll start with you.
Remove SBMM and start there. Remove that. Get some fun back in here. I would just love like more things added to Crucible in general. Like it kind of has felt like I'm just shoved in the corner. You know, like Guardian ranks came out. PvP isn't mentioned a single time in Guardian ranks, and Gambit isn't as well, but you know, but it's not mentioned at all. So it's like, so in order to be a Guardian, being a Crucible player like doesn't even matter. Okay. So and putting things like artifice armor in the flawless chests. Like I can just grind hard mode of a dungeon final boss and grind artifice armor in like 5 minutes. Why can't we add something like artifice armor that takes an hour plus to gain from the flawless chest? I think you could definitely add a lot more incentives into Crucible stuff and spread out some of the love in Crucible. But really, yeah, I think for me, I'm not super concerned about the final shape. I think them delaying it is actually a good thing because they're saying that it's good but not great, and they want it to be great.
I did like that acknowledgement.
Yeah, I think that that's good, and them being like, we need this to be great, and I think them delaying it is good. So I'm not super concerned about it, but I am concerned about the communication. It goes back to what we said before. I want the communication to be honest. I want it to be open. I want it to just feel like I'm talking to a human. And we, like Datto said, we've heard about the executives doing all this stuff. We're gonna need some communication on that.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's something that they can do. I don't know, but I would love for them to just be like, here's how we're fixing the problems internally that has led us to the problems that we're at right now. So I think a lot of it is communication for me, and then just hopefully that Crucible Strike team can keep doing stuff. Hopefully the maps pack that they put out is really enjoyable and very good.
Yeah.
And I hope that they continue doing that. Because yeah, for expansions, we expected what 3 to 4 maps every single expansion for Crucible, and then it just kind of ended up being like, we don't do this anymore. That's not a thing we do. So I would love that to become a new norm of
Yeah.
them spreading love throughout multiple parts of the game instead
Yeah.
of just ignoring it.
I agree. I think one point you touch on is like endgame materials being put into not only just like endgame Crucible, but just like even like all of the core playlists.
Yeah.
Like, dude, give me Ascendant Alloys as a super rare drop for running 20 strikes. Like, it takes
Yeah.
the same amount of time. It takes more time to do that, but I'm engaging with your game actively. Like, make it a rare thing that like I don't have to go farm Wellspring to get Ascendant Alloys. I don't need, or Ascendant Shards or whatever it might be. I feel like that's so healthy for like the natural player base, for like the people who first of all struggle to get those materials in the first place. And the kind of the first place you direct them is those core playlists. Like, that would be such a healthy change, I think, for just getting people to engage and like have any incentive to just grind the core playlist. Because right now there's very little. There's not strike specific loot or much of that that's super interesting at the moment. The SPM MSU is obviously like, I think I already saw it in chat a few times, is like, oh, time to stomp those noobs. I don't think that's the goal, right? Like, that's the automatic response every time is like, oh yeah, you just want those 40 kill games for YouTube that you can upload to inflate your ego and whatever. It's just not the case. Like, there's a place for sweaty games, and then there's quick play.
Yeah, it's for me, it's all about variety. When you put in a ton of matchmaking parameters, we have the team-based matchmaking, we have skill-based matchmaking, they're looking for people in your region. When you put in all of these matchmaking parameters, first of all, in a peer-to-peer game, it's a little rough anyway, because you don't have the dedicated service to have that many, or the player base to have that many matchmaking parameters. But the reason that I really enjoy PvP in games is the variety of my experience. Like, when I go and play a strike, I know exactly where the enemies are going to be. I know what's going to happen. I know how it's going to play out. I know what to use and when to use it.
Yeah.
But in Crucible, it's like, and any PvP game, I play it because I go onto this map and there's people using different weapons, different subclasses. They're moving around the map differently. Whereas the more matchmaking parameters you put into the game, it kills that variety. And it almost feels like you're playing the same people, which sometimes you are playing literally the same people every game. But even if it's not literally the same people, it can be they're all using the same class. They're using the same weapons, just like the Arc Titan with Immortal, Cloud Strike. That's all you see. So it cuts down on the variety, which cuts down the enjoyment of the game. Sometimes I do want to stomp, but sometimes I'm going to get stomped and go, well, damn, those guys are just better than me. And then sometimes you're going to have those super close games that get your adrenaline pumping, and I want all of that. I don't want just one or the other, and that's kind of where SBMM comes into it. It cuts down on the variety.
100%. I think people hate getting stomped, but I mean, at the end of the day, like, that's the reality of gaming. Sometimes you're gonna get beat, and what's great about it is the matches are 5 minutes long, and you can GG go next. You don't need to dwell on it for that long. Datto, what's your number one priority?
I'm not even sure anymore. I usually am going into some kind of an expansion cycle or this cycle or that cycle being like, I hope this happens. I hope this happens. And at this point, I don't really know what I want to have happen. I just want, I want just Final Shape to end pretty solidly. I want it to be satisfying, but I don't know. I just don't think without any sort of upper management changes, again, if that is really the root of the issue, I think without any changes happening there, does anything change at all? Right? Like, maybe finally they start to see the light. It's like, oh my God, okay, it's actually kind of bad now. Maybe we'll make some changes. I don't know. We're never gonna get that information. We're never gonna know those politics inside of the office or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I'm forced to continue to be a skeptic and just try to have cautious optimism as I've had for the past 5 years now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think without changes, significant changes to the way things are able to the way people are able to go about their job and maybe try some riskier things. I think that's the biggest thing is like try riskier things. I would rather Bungie try something out and it doesn't work than just keep the status quo. And I do feel like they've been
Yeah.
toying with that, like season 21 with deep dives and the sort of roguelite mechanics that they were experimenting with. I think that is worth experimenting with further. But yeah, it's at the point where it's just like the game needs some novelty. It
Yeah.
needs we need some novelties in the game.
Yeah.
I think season 22 in a vacuum, just like when we compare to other seasons, was actually pretty good. It's just like the continued apathy of the community not really helping. But yeah, I don't know. It's a lot of those things combined, and I'm just tired of having this cautious optimism.
Yeah, and I mean, I hear
I'm just
you on a
tired.
lot of that. Like, I think a lot of that comes down to just player fatigue, and I also think there's like challenges from Bungie to just continue to innovate on a universe that's been around for 10 years. Like, how many
Yeah.
different unique ideas can you do that are just groundbreaking and really gonna, light the universe on fire? And I think part of like I believe that they still can. They've done more unique things than I've seen from most studios. And, I think a lot of the longevity in gaming now is like PvP type games, whether, again, speaking back to the value of PvP, but like, I mean, League of Legends, TFT, like Overwatch, whatever it might be, like Apex Legends, Valorant, like they're all some of the top games in gaming, period, because there's so much replayability behind that. And so I don't think those studios necessarily struggle with like what Bungie struggles with, which is just like pure creative ideation. And to an extent, like I do sympathize with that, but at the end of the day, like if you want to stay relevant in the current scene of gaming, I mean, WoW's been here for 20 plus years, right? Like they're still doing it, they're still kicking ass. And I mean, to compete with all the single player games and the PvP focused games that are constantly releasing content, like they got to find ways to do it as difficult as it may be. Like taking those risks is super important for sure. Jarv, what are your number one priorities for either you or your community for Final Shape?
I just want Bungie to take the time they need to get the final shape right, really, because you know how the saying goes, like a late game can be great, but a rush game would always be bad, kind of thing. And Bungie seems to rebound the best when their backs are to the wall, Taken King, Forsaken. So I'm hopeful in that respect that if they take more time, that they can deliver on it. I'm just skeptical that 15 weeks in game development or 16 weeks isn't a great deal of time. So I do question what they can do. And like Datto said, what can they produce if the leadership is the issue based on what we know? But like what said, in terms of what we, can potentially be hopeful for, like a sprinkle of little bit of magic on some of the ritual stuff, like Crucible naturally, because that is the foundation and the core. Once the seasons dry out, and even when the seasons are in full swing, like the quest always require you to go into those things, and if there's nothing shown on those, then there's no real excitement there. There's not enough reasons to play, and you even touched on some of the loot, and even some of the dungeons need updating, like Shattered Throne, Pit of Heresy. They don't even have Artifice Armor or anything like that. They're so like they've aged. There's a lot of aged stuff that needs a little bit of either moving on or like rotating out with something new or bringing up to date. Really, I'd see a bit more of that.
And that's like, I mean, to your point, Jarv, I think more than anything, like, as difficult as it would be for a creator of this game, and which, obviously, like, we've made careers on this game, we stream this game, make YouTube content, etc. As painful it would be for like an extended delay, I would so much prefer that they actually nail the expansion and make it like that Forsaken level, the Taken King level. They obviously know better than we do, but like it's tough to see how, you know, that 4-month delay like really grants them that huge window to go and make like sweeping changes, and maybe they don't need it. Maybe they're confident in the product they already have, and maybe it's just some, you know, additional depth that they're adding in certain areas, or, you know, additional features to elements they've already added, which is most likely the case. But yeah, I think you nailed it. Like I back them 100% to delay and take the time that they need to actually knock this out of the park. And Datto mentioned it earlier, like that delays are fine if you end up delivering a banger. Like there's so many games I feel like in nowadays that are just pressured to release just for the sake of releasing. And then, you know, like Halo Infinite, for example, game a lot of people completely off their radar, and now, you know, they've continued to at launch it was in a really tough spot, lasted maybe a month, maybe 2, and now they've continued to add all these updates, and people are like, why wasn't this in the game at the beginning? You know, like obviously you don't always know based off of player feedback and sentiment, but like that's why these types of exercises are so important, because like sometimes they need to hear the hard conversations of like, this is what your player base wants. And now Halo's thriving. I mean, look at the Cyberpunk DLC. Like, you know, I think Cyberpunk was decent upon release, but now this DLC, just like from what I've heard, kind of blew the base game out of the water.
It's so good,
and it's just an excellent addition to the game. So whatever, in my opinion, it takes to like get the game to the state that it needs to be in for the culmination of a 10-year Light Dark saga, like I'm personally all for it, even if it means, you know, some slower times in between the next expansion, which I know is not easy for people to hear. But sometimes that's the reality of what it takes, you know, like there's a lot of conversations around the industry where people crunch ridiculous hours to hit deadlines. I don't think anybody wants that for any of the employees at Bungie. And
No.
But then, like, you know, then they're not happy with the product, and they're like, oh, well, why didn't they just work more hours to get this done? Like it's this never ending, like really difficult situation for the gaming industry. So yeah, I think delay as long as they need, obviously within bounds, but like I hope they just nail it. I think that's a really good point. So any other closing thoughts before I let you guys go? I know we're running up against the 2-hour mark here, so I want to be respectful of your guys' time. But if you have any closing thoughts, feel free to share them.
I think just I think we're all rooting for Bungie. I mean, some people aren't. Some people want to see like the studio go under, which if you're upset at people losing their jobs, I don't know why you'd want to see
I think that's super
everyone else
misguided.
lose their job.
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, I know that a lot of people working at Bungie are super passionate about what they're working on. I'm rooting for them to be able to put in all the changes and do all the things that they want to do. I hope that they're able to get things right over there. And yeah, just sending lots of love over to people who did lose their job. I hope that they're able to get on their feet soon. And for everyone still left at Bungie, I hope you're able to do what you want to do, because you guys got good ideas. You guys have a lot of passion. And I'm definitely rooting for them to make Final Shape a banger.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I no ill will towards the individual employees. I hope they make an awesome game. I don't want the franchise to fail. I don't want it to go away. But yeah, I don't know. Don't have much to say. I hope, you know, again, all affected employees land on your feet. Hope you find something even greater than what you were doing. Everyone's still there. You know, I hope you guys are able to, you know, pull something out and have it be awesome, and
Yeah.
you know, maybe get a fresh start after Final Shape. You know, I'm sure there's a lot of ideas that maybe they've wanted to try out, but it was like after Final Shape, we'll try a lot of these things, and I'm kind of hoping that's the case.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mirror a lot of what they said, especially about the people that were affected by. I've been in that position myself 3 times, so I know it completely sucks on a lot of levels, and that's 100 odd families, right? So we just wish them all the best going into the new year. And often, what we often find is that they often go on to open their own studios later down the line. At least some of them possibly will. So I look forward to seeing what potential future projects might come their way, and look forward to trying to engage in those in the years ahead. But Destiny's created so many memories for all of us, whether that's just gaming or creation, friends, family, and things like that. And Bungie are at their best when they surprise and delight us. And I think Final Shape's your perfect opportunity to do that. And I just hope you can get the time you need to get it right.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your guys' thoughts. I guess just to echo what you guys have said, it's a confusing time to be a Destiny player, and there's a lot of different emotions kind of flying around, and it's a very complicated issue that we have very little insight into. So before being outraged at Bungie as a whole or hoping the game fails, I encourage you to understand that businesses it's very difficult to run a gaming studio and remain profitable. It's difficult to incorporate ideas that every single member of a community is going to agree with. There's always going to be differing opinions. And despite, what has happened over the last week with the upper management and things like that, I think that we're all not happy with. Rooting for Bungie to fail only hurts more of just people in similar situations that are doing great work at the studio for the game we all love. So wishing them nothing but the best, and I want to thank you guys so much for taking time to join this the community summit, as I'm calling it, kind of trying to just consolidate any feedback we can, any community sentiment, and just be kind of an outlet of whether it's frustration or just wanting to feel heard for the community. I appreciate you guys being here. Chat, we get around to show them some love for taking the time to participate, and all of their links are on screen if you guys want to go check them out. So thank you guys so much for joining
thanks for
again,
having
and
me.
Thank you, man.
appreciate the conversation.